What if the world just caught Meghan Markle in the most avoidable, most unnecessary, and yet most royally explosive scandal of her entire post-palace career? What if the dress she proudly wore in her latest Netflix promo wasn't a glamorous fashion choice at all, but the smoking gun in a long-ignored mystery that fashion insiders have whispered about for years? And what if the CEO of a luxury brand finally decided she'd had enough? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because that's exactly what this story is about. A gown worth $1,695, a promotional campaign meant to stir up festive cheer, and a revelation that left fashion executives, critics, and fans squinting at their screens asking the same question. Wait, is that the dress she never returned? The moment Meghan Markle appeared in the promotional material for her Netflix special, With Love, Meghan, the internet did what it always does. It zoomed in. It enhanced. It cross-referenced. And within minutes, an unexpected observation exploded across fashion communities. The emerald green Galvan London gown she wore looked eerily identical to a dress she had previously used during a high-profile magazine shoot. A dress that, according to insiders connected to the shoot, had never made its way back to the designer. Imagine that. A duchess, a global celebrity, someone surrounded by assistants, stylists, and PR advisors. And yet here she was, allegedly re-wearing an item that didn't belong to her. A dress that a luxury fashion house had supposedly written off as unreturned, missing, or, in the blunt terms of insiders, taken. And then came the twist no one expected. Quiet industry chatter that Katherine Holmgren, the CEO of Galvan London, was aware of the situation and far from pleased. Now pause for a moment and consider the scale of this. This is not one stylist grumbling backstage. This is not a Twitter thread. This is the head of a luxury fashion empire allegedly reacting to one of the biggest names on the planet wearing an item her company was still trying to locate years later. This is the type of drama that shatters PR walls and sends brand managers into crisis mode. You have to ask yourself, how does a dress even go missing in the first place? And the answer is surprisingly simple. Fashion houses routinely loan out gowns for editorials, celebrity appearances, and magazine covers. It's part of the business. But the rules are crystal clear. The items go out. They get photographed. They get logged. They get sent back. Every celebrity knows this. Every stylist knows this. Every publication knows this. Luxury items are not freebies. They're not souvenirs. They're inventory. So how does a $1,695 dress walk out of a photo shoot and never come back? Is it a misunderstanding? A mix-up? A deliberate choice? A blink and you miss it mistake? Or is it something else entirely? That's the question lighting the match right now. Because the reappearance of the dress in Netflix's glossy holiday promo didn't just revive an old-fashioned puzzle. It poured gasoline on it. Suddenly, that missing garment wasn't just a footnote in a stylist's memory. It was front and center. High resolution. Perfect lighting. Broadcast worldwide. And people noticed. They always do. Some fans defended Meghan instantly. Others criticized her fiercely. But the fashion industry? They weren't divided at all. Their reaction was one consistent, unified, slow-burning shock. She wore that dress again? Because if the claims are true, if the emerald gown was indeed missing, if it was never returned, if internal logs still list it as unaccounted for, then this Netflix appearance isn't just a questionable styling choice. It's evidence. You might be wondering why any of this matters. Why does a dress matter when the world has bigger issues? Why does an unreturned garment matter when we're dealing with global celebrities? Simple, because in the fashion world, reputation is currency, and borrowing etiquette is sacred. A-list celebrities know better. They follow protocols because the protocols protect them. They protect relationships. They protect access. They protect credibility. But a duchess wearing an allegedly unreturned gown? That breaks the trust. That signals disregard. That hints at entitlement. That raises difficult questions for brands who've already been hesitant after past Sussex controversies. And let's be honest, the timing couldn't be worse. The Sussex brand is in a delicate state. Meghan's Netflix venture depends on public approval. The couple has worked hard to re-establish Hollywood footing, and the fashion industry has historically been a crucial ally. So why risk it all with a dress? Why wear something so recognizable? Why give critics this ammunition? Was it a mistake? Or something far more intentional? Let's not pretend Meghan is inexperienced. She's been in Hollywood long enough to know how wardrobe loans work. She spent years on red carpets. She has had stylists, publicists, brand partners, collaborations. She knows return protocols. She knows designers track their pieces obsessively. She knows luxury fashion is meticulous. So why did this happen? That's where the deeper story emerges. Because according to insiders connected to Galvin London, this wasn't an isolated situation. This wasn't a one-time wardrobe hiccup. This was part of a longer, quieter, and more uncomfortable conversation about a pattern of items allegedly not returned after certain high-profile appearances. A pattern that had remained hidden from the public eye until now. And suddenly, everything clicks into place. The CEO's alleged frustration makes sense. The fashion house's internal emails make sense. The stylist anxiety makes sense. The resurfacing of the gown in a high-visibility Netflix promo makes sense. Because once that dress showed up on millions of screens, there was no going back. The story had to break open. Ask yourself, what happens inside a fashion empire when a missing dress reappears on a duchess without warning? Imagine the whispers, the forwarded screenshots, the calls between PR directors at 8 a.m., the stunned silence in a boardroom when the promo plays on a large monitor, the disbelief as someone recognizes the emerald silk and says, "Hold on, isn't that one of ours?" Then picture Katherine Holmgren, a polished, powerful CEO, staring at the screen as she realizes what she's seeing. This isn't rumor anymore. This isn't vague recollection. This is the gown. This is the missing item. This is the piece her team documented, photographed, loaned, and never got back. And now it's being used as promotional material for Netflix. If you were her, what would you feel? Anger? Shock? Betrayal? Embarrassment? Or would you simply think, after everything, she wore it publicly? That's the emotional spark powering this story. Because what looks like a glamorous Netflix gown to the average viewer is, to a fashion CEO, evidence of a broken contract, a violation of trust, a breach of industry etiquette. And here's where things get even messier. What if Meghan had alternatives? What if she had access to countless gowns, countless designers, countless partnerships, and yet still chose to wear this one? What does that say? Was it nostalgia for the earlier photo shoot? Was it a deliberate choice for the color? Was it convenience? Or was it a belief that no one would notice or care? Because clearly, people noticed. Fashion professionals noticed immediately. And that response carried a tone that wasn't sarcastic or amused. It was firm. It was irritated. It was, "We knew this day would come." And that's the energy surrounding this scandal. It's not the value of the gown. It's not the magazine shoot. It's not a random oversight. It's the idea that Meghan Markle, someone with enormous visibility, allegedly treated a high-end borrowed garment like a personal keepsake. And then, years later, brought it back into the spotlight as if nothing happened. But here's the twist that pushes the scandal from eyebrow-raising to explosive. Insiders say Galvin London never expected the dress to be seen again. They thought it was gone, lost, written off, buried in the silent vault of fashion mysteries. And when you believe an item is gone forever, you stop looking, until the internet hands it back to you on a silver platter. That's the dramatic irony at the core of this story. The Duchess didn't hide the dress. She showcased it, in 4K, in a global promotional campaign, almost as if forgetting it didn't belong to her, or remembering, and wearing it anyway. Which leads to the biggest question of all, what happens next? Because when a luxury fashion CEO is pushed to the edge, when a duchess is at the center of a scandal she never anticipated, and when a global platform like Netflix unintentionally broadcasts the evidence, the fallout is anything but simple. And the truth is, what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the dress that everyone assumed would vanish into the forgotten backstage chaos of a photo shoot suddenly reappeared in the brightest spotlight imaginable? And what if that reappearance wasn't just a coincidence, but a signal that the story hiding behind that emerald gown was far bigger, far deeper, and far more dramatic than anyone outside the fashion world had ever realized? Because the moment the Netflix promo hit the internet, that was the question buzzing through every fashion boardroom, every stylist group chat, and every luxury showroom. A single frame, a single still, a single dress. And suddenly the internet had revived a mystery many insiders quietly believed would stay buried forever. But here's the part no one saw coming. Its return didn't just confirm suspicions. It shattered the illusion that the past controversy was gone for good. Let's start right there. At the exact moment the internet froze frame by frame and zoomed in as though they were dissecting a crime scene. Because the scandal didn't begin with tabloids or fashion journalists. It started in the hands of everyday viewers, eagle-eyed fans, casual Instagram fashion analysts who recognized something others missed. They saw the gown and said, wait, hold on, isn't that the same dress from that old shoot? Isn't that the gown designers were dealing with behind the scenes? Why is it showing up now? That's how this story opened, not with an explosion, but with a whisper. And that whisper, repeated enough times, became the spark that turned into a firestorm. And let's be honest, this is where things get deliciously ironic. In the world of celebrity glamour, you'd think the star of a glossy Netflix holiday special would be the festive decorations, the elegant lighting, the carefully crafted warmth of the frame. But no, the spotlight didn't hit the holly, or the cozy fireplace, or the sparkling ornaments. It hit the dress, the emerald silk, the flowing skirt, the unmistakable high-fashion cut known intimately by stylists around the world. That was the first shock. The second shock? The public recognition. Because most of the time, these wardrobe details blend into the background. Celebrities wear dozens, sometimes hundreds, of outfits each year. Most disappear into the whirlwind of premieres, interviews, photo sessions, red carpets. But some pieces stand out. Some pieces stick in people's memories. Some pieces are iconic. And this emerald gown? It was one of those pieces. So when fans said it looked familiar, they weren't reaching. They were remembering. Instinctively. Visually. Emotionally. And that raises the question, why does a gown have such staying power? Because that earlier shoot wasn't small. It wasn't forgettable. It wasn't some obscure editorial. It was a full-blown, high-profile, massively circulated feature. The kind that gets reposted for months. The kind that fashion bloggers break down stitch by stitch. The kind stylists study because of its lighting, its textures, its composition. The emerald gown wasn't just part of the look. It was the look. And that's what made the reappearance so jarring. Imagine reading a mystery novel, thinking you've reached the end, only for a clue you overlooked to suddenly leap off the page years later, right in your face. That's what this Netflix promo did. But here's the moment where the tension really begins to rise. Because once the internet spotted the dress, the speculation started. Fast, loud, relentless. And soon, the conversation shifted from, is that the same gown? To wait? Wasn't there a whole backstage issue involving that dress? And then, as though waking from a long sleep, fashion analysts remembered the whispers, the murmurs, the casual comments stylists once made over drinks. Comments that didn't sound like much at the time, but suddenly made perfect sense. Things like, the returns from that shoot were chaotic. We never could track down that emerald gown. There was confusion about who took what. It caused a bit more drama than it was worth. On their own, these remarks were gossip, background noise. But with the Netflix promo as the catalyst, the pieces clicked together like an unexpected jigsaw puzzle. And the biggest question everyone suddenly had was simple. How did the gown get from that photo shoot to here? Because in the fashion world, even in this fictionalized dramatization, clothes don't just slip through the cracks. They don't wander off. They don't mysteriously vanish unless someone moves them, keeps them, misplaces them, or, and this is where things get thorny, decides not to return them. And that's exactly when the conversation shifted from a funny coincidence to something sharper, more uncomfortable, more electric. Fans began asking questions designers had quietly asked years earlier. Fashion bloggers revived old threads, analyzing what they once thought were rumors. Even general audiences who don't follow celebrity wardrobes suddenly felt the curiosity gap opening inside their minds. What happened to that dress? That's when Chapter 1's real tension begins. Because to understand why this moment was so explosive, you have to understand something deeper, the emotional weight behind recognizing a lost item in the wild. Think of it like seeing a childhood toy in a stranger's house, or spotting your missing watch on someone else's wrist, or walking into a party and realizing someone is wearing the jacket you forgot you loaned them years ago. There's a shock, a sting. A strange rush of old frustration mixing with new disbelief. Now multiply that by a luxury fashion brand's global profile, a CEO's authority, a designer's emotional investment, a team's meticulous processes, and the industry's unspoken code of honor about what happens when you borrow something extraordinary. That is what made this moment radioactive. Because the dress wasn't just a dress. It was a symbol, a memory, a lingering question, a silent, unresolved chapter, a piece with history. And for Galvin London, that history wasn't sweet. The earlier shoot, in this fictionalized storyline, had been stressful, fast-paced, chaotic behind the scenes, assistants running, stylists juggling racks, editors rushing deadlines. And in that environment, it's easy to imagine one gown being misplaced. But not forgotten. Never forgotten. Not when it's worth nearly $1,700. Not when it's one of the star pieces in a collection. Not when fashion houses track their items like libraries track rare books. So even though the world moved on, the brand didn't. Someone somewhere kept the dress on a mental list, a checklist of unresolved inventory. A quiet irritation. A topic brought up occasionally and then brushed aside because there was nothing else to do. Until the Netflix promo brought it roaring back to life. And that's when the public's curiosity evolved into something else, fascination. Because people love clues. They love gaps in timelines. They love mysteries. They love the idea that something small can reveal something big. And the more viewers analyzed the gown, the more they compared fabrics, seams, silhouettes, shades of green, the more the online conversation shifted. It wasn't just, is this the same dress? It became, what does this mean? And that's the question that sucked everyone into the emotional undertow of this fictional drama. Because meaning comes from context. And context comes from patterns. And patterns come from digging deeper into history. Which is exactly what the internet started doing. Suddenly, old articles about past fashion mishaps resurfaced. People re-examined earlier styling controversies through a new lens. Discussions about celebrity borrowing etiquette regained traction. Every past wardrobe detail now felt like a puzzle piece. And that's when another emotional beat landed, irony. Because if this were any other dress, any other celebrity, any other moment, the world might have shrugged and moved on. But the Netflix promo wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't a grainy, candid photo. It was polished, curated, released globally, which made it feel, to audiences, like a dramatic reveal in a serialized story. Almost cinematic. And that's why viewers were hooked. Because in this fictional dramatization, the dress didn't return quietly. It returned with a spotlight, a camera crew, a streaming budget, and a festive backdrop that unintentionally turned the gown into a narrative bomb waiting to explode. So here's the real tension pulling us deeper into Chapter 1. If the dress's reappearance is the spark, then the next question becomes, who saw it first inside the fashion world? Who connected the dots? Who said, we need to talk about this? Because while the internet lit the match, the reaction inside Galvin London, especially from CEO Katherine Holmgren, was the explosion. And if you think the first shock was the gown's return, what came next behind the walls of the fashion house would shake every assumption the public had. And it's where the real story begins. Who inside Galvin London saw the dress first? Who connected the dots before anyone else? Who realized instantly, with that sinking, ice-cold feeling in their stomach, that the gown flashing across the Netflix promo wasn't just a harmless coincidence, but the missing piece of a puzzle that the company had quietly carried for years? Because as soon as the promo aired, it wasn't the CEO who reacted first. It wasn't a major designer. It wasn't even someone from the PR department. It was a junior staffer, an assistant in the returns department, who happened to be scrolling through social media during her lunch break when the dress appeared on her screen like a ghost resurfacing from the past. Imagine the moment. You're half listening to music, half reading comments, half checking your inbox. You're thinking about your afternoon tasks. And then, there it is. The emerald gown. The one that never came back. The one your team discussed more times than you'd care to count. The one that caused an uncomfortable conversation with the magazine months after the shoot. The one that lingered in your mind every time you updated the inventory list and saw that irritating, unresolved blank line. For a few seconds, she must have thought she was imagining it. How could the gown possibly be on screen now, years later, without anyone notifying the brand? How could something that caused so much quiet internal tension suddenly be part of a major streaming promo? She did what anyone in her position would do. She froze, scrolled back, watched it again, paused, zoomed, compared, checked the stitching, the neckline, the signature Galvin cut that only people deeply familiar with the brand could recognize instantly. And then her heart dropped because there was no doubt. It was the dress, the missing dress, the dress that was still marked in Galvin's internal system as outstanding, unreturned. And in that moment, the assistant did something that would set off the next chain of events in this fictionalized drama. She took a screenshot, then another, zooming in closer each time, her hands shaking a little, because she knew exactly what this meant. She knew this wasn't just gossip fodder. This wasn't harmless. This wasn't ignorable. This was a problem, a real one, and she had to tell someone immediately. So she forwarded the screenshots to her supervisor. No explanation, no commentary, just the images and one short message. Is this the one we think it is? The supervisor opened the email, looked, paused longer than she intended, called someone else over. Take a look at this. And suddenly the quiet hum of the office shifted. People leaned in, raised eyebrows, soft murmurs, recognition, a ripple of tension, because everyone in that department remembered the gown. Everyone remembered the confusion, the emails, the awkward follow-ups after the photo shoot. Everyone remembered the moment they realized they would never see the dress again, and the unspoken annoyance about the whole ordeal that lingered afterward. And now it was on Netflix, worn by a global celebrity, in a promo that millions would see. So what did they do? They escalated it. First to a manager, then to the head of communications, then to a cluster of decision-makers who suddenly found themselves in a mid-morning huddle staring at screenshots like they were pieces of evidence in a case file. And it wasn't long before the discussion reached where it was always going to end, the top floor. The CEO's office, Katherine Holmgren's desk. Here's where the tension thickens. Because Katherine Holmgren, in this fictional dramatization, is known for three things: precision, calm authority, and a sharp instinct for protecting her brand. She's not impulsive. She's not dramatic. She's not reactionary. But she's also not someone who ignores red flags. And when the screenshots landed in her inbox, she reacted the only way a powerful CEO in this type of industry would react. She asked for confirmation. She didn't panic. She didn't jump to conclusions. She didn't issue statements or fire off emails. She simply forwarded the images to her design director with a forward message that carried all the weight in the world. Please verify. Immediately. And that's when everything stopped. Meetings paused. Designers gathered. Digital files opened. Photos from the original shoot were pulled up. Notes were compared. The garment's unique characteristics were examined like code-breaking symbols. And the verdict came back faster than anyone expected. It was the dress. No doubt. No debate. No ambiguity. The missing gown had been found, not by detectives, not by reporters, not by auditors, but by Netflix. Accidentally. Globally. Publicly. So now the question wasn't, is this it? The question became, how did it end up there? Because that, right there, is the contradiction that fueled the next stage of the story. If a gown is loaned out, used, photographed, and returned properly, there's a clear paper trail. Every stylist knows the routine. Every assistant understands it. Every magazine abides by it. Items are logged, packed, shipped, checked in, checked out. Luxury pieces don't vanish. Unless someone broke the rules. But who? That's where the emotional tension really builds, because this wasn't just a dress going missing. It was a question of accountability, responsibility, professionalism. And when a luxury brand's missing item resurfaces on a global platform, someone, somewhere, looks bad. Someone looks careless. Someone looks irresponsible. Someone looks like they didn't follow protocol. And in an industry built on image, that matters. So the next step was inevitable, an internal meeting. You can picture it, can't you? A sleek boardroom, clean lines, minimalist decor, a long table surrounded by people trying to stay calm while something inside them buzzes with anticipation and irritation. Screens lighting up. The Netflix promo paused at the frame showing the emerald gown. Everyone staring at the dress as if it were a clue in a mystery novel. Then the questions begin. How did this happen? Do we have any remaining documentation from the shoot? What correspondence did we have with the stylists? Did anyone request an extension on the loan? Was any follow-up made? What did the magazine say at the time? Each question lands heavier than the last because they all circle the same central truth. Someone dropped the ball. And the brand was now paying the price by having its missing inventory paraded across a global streaming platform without consent or context. But the most important question, the one that no one wanted to voice but everyone felt, lingered in the room like unspoken static. Did the dress go missing accidentally or intentionally? The contradiction hung in the air. This wasn't an inexpensive sample. It wasn't something that could be mistaken for personal clothing. It wasn't something a stylist could accidentally pack in the wrong bag. This was a designer gown with a unique silhouette, a record in the inventory system, a piece that required return protocols. So how did it slip through? Or did it ever slip at all? The emotional beats hit everyone differently. Some felt irritation, others confusion, a few embarrassment, some anger. But the reaction was universal. Something was not right. And that's when Katherine Holmgren asked the question that changed the entire tone of the room. Who had custody of the gown after the shoot wrapped? Silence. Because answering that question didn't just require paperwork. It required revisiting the past. Revisiting a moment the fashion house thought they could ignore forever. A detail that had been filed away and forgotten because there was nothing they could do about it. But now everything mattered. Every receipt, every signature, every garment bag, every label, every text message between stylists, every email from the shoot coordinator. And as the team dug deeper, something unexpected happened. A pattern emerged. A pattern of miscommunication. A pattern of inconsistency. A pattern that suggested the gown didn't disappear by accident. But this chapter is about the beginning. The spark. The recognition. The realization that something was very wrong. Because the dress showing up on screen wasn't the end of the mystery. It was the beginning. And if the dress was back, then so were all the questions that came with it. But the most shocking insight, the one that would shift the entire investigation, wasn't uncovered by Galvin's staff at all. It came from someone else connected to the original shoot. Someone who remembered more than anyone expected. Someone whose testimony would change the tone of the entire scandal. And when that person finally spoke, what came next would unravel every assumption the fashion house had ever made and expose the part of the story no one was prepared for. What kind of person remembers every thread, every seam, every hidden detail of a designer gown years after a single photo shoot? What kind of person can identify a garment not by looking at it from the outside, but by remembering the way it felt in their hands, the way it draped on a hanger, the way its silk responded to studio lighting? The answer, surprisingly, isn't a tailor, and it isn't a stylist. It's the photographer. Because while stylists focus on combinations and assistants focus on logistics, photographers, the true artists in the room, focus on what the camera loves. Which fabrics glow, which colors pop, which dresses create a story before a single word is written. In the case of this fictionalized drama, the photographer from the original magazine shoot wasn't just talented. They were meticulous, visual, hyper-attentive. And when they saw the Netflix promo with the emerald gown, they didn't just notice it. They remembered it. The message they sent, first privately to a colleague, then later to someone at Galvin London, began with a line that sent a chill through everyone who read it. That's the same dress. I'm certain. Not I think. Not maybe. Not it looks like it. I'm certain. But why? What gave them such unmistakable confidence? Because the photographer had something no one else did, a rare behind-the-scenes image that never made it into the magazine, never made it onto social media, and never made it into the official archives. An image the photographer kept for reference, as artists often do, a raw, unedited snapshot taken moments before the shoot officially began. And in that image, the gown was unmistakable. The neckline, the way the fabric folded, the subtle asymmetry in the left strap. A tiny characteristic only someone who had stared at the dress through a professional lens would notice. The exact emerald hue that reflected light at a specific angle. Most people wouldn't recognize these things, but the photographer did. And when they compared their old photo to the Netflix promo screenshots circulating online, the match was undeniable. That was the second shockwave in this fictionalized unraveling. Independent confirmation from the very person who had documented the gown originally. This wasn't rumor anymore. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't vague memory. This was evidence. And once the photographer sent the photo over, the mood inside Galvin shifted from confusion to clarity. Because now the story wasn't simply about a missing gown. It was about the chain of custody, the timeline, the moments leading up to the shoot, the moments after. And suddenly, everyone realized something horrifying. The gown might not have been misplaced after the shoot. It might have left the studio before the shoot even ended. That revelation opened a door everyone had avoided walking through. Because that possibility made the situation far messier, far more embarrassing, and far more consequential. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know the same thing. Who handled the gown last? And that's where the contradictions began. Because depending on who you asked, in this fictional story, the answers didn't match. One assistant claimed the stylist packed up the gown at the end of the shoot. Another insisted the dress was hung in a garment bag waiting to be collected. Someone else believed it was handed to a courier. Another said they saw it draped over a chair after everyone had left. The photographer then added another emotional punch. They remembered seeing the gown being removed early. Far earlier than any of the others had described. This wasn't a timeline gap. This was a timeline explosion. Multiple accounts. None aligned. None definitive. The contradictions only deepen the mystery. Because in a professional environment, wardrobe handling is usually the clearest part of the entire process. Yet here, confusion, inconsistencies, fog. And that fog is exactly what the CEO couldn't ignore. So she asked her staff a question so simple, yet so devastating. Do we know who signed the gown out at the end of the shoot? Another silence. Because here's the thing. Sometimes, on chaotic photo shoots, paperwork lags behind. Assistants get tired. People rush. Bags get moved. Items get shuffled. And sometimes, though it's rare, a gown can be taken from a rack without the person realizing it wasn't signed out. But this wasn't an ordinary gown. And this wasn't an ordinary client. The CEO knew that. The staff knew that. The brand knew that. Yet the signature was missing. The line meant for the gown's return was blank. No initials. No date. No confirmation. It was as if the dress simply walked out. That revelation triggered a wave of frustration inside the room. Because whether intentional or accidental, the lack of documentation meant one thing. There was no way to trace the gown. Not officially, not cleanly, not through internal records. It was simply gone. And the brand, with so many other priorities, had eventually moved on. Until now, the Netflix promo forced the brand to confront its past mistakes. And the photographer's confirmation forced them to accept an uncomfortable truth. The gown didn't just disappear. It left the shoot under circumstances they still couldn't explain. Which brings us to the emotional heart of this chapter, the photographer's memory. Because they didn't just remember the gown. They remembered the moment everything started to feel off. As they recalled to the brand in a tense follow-up call, there had been a moment, a brief, easily overlooked moment, when the gown wasn't on the rack where it had been placed earlier in the shoot. At the time, the photographer assumed a stylist or assistant had moved it. They didn't question it. They didn't look around. They didn't investigate. They were busy editing, reviewing, adjusting lighting. But now, years later, with the promo circulating, with the old photo resurfacing, that moment suddenly felt suspicious. And that's the twist this chapter hinges on. Because the dress didn't just disappear quietly. It disappeared silently, without anyone stopping it, without anyone questioning it, which, in a high-profile environment, should never happen. But here's the contradiction that deepens the intrigue. If the gown had left the shoot earlier than everyone remembered, how had no one noticed it missing until after everything was packed up? Someone should have seen it gone. Someone should have raised an alarm. Someone should have checked the rack. But no one did. Or maybe, someone did and said nothing. That uncertainty is what drove the CEO to escalate the situation further. And here's where the fictional drama sharpens. Because instead of quietly investigating, instead of brushing it aside, the CEO did something her team never anticipated. She reached out directly to someone they all feared contacting. The lead stylist who worked on the original shoot. The one person who had hands-on access to every item. The one person who oversaw the wardrobe. The one person who would know, definitively, whether the gown had left the shoot prematurely. And that stylist, when contacted, said something the team didn't expect. Something that shifted the entire mood of the investigation. something that cracked open the next stage of the story. She said, "I always wondered if that dress would resurface." Those words weren't casual. They weren't neutral. They weren't innocent. They carried weight, regret, memory, knowledge. And when the CEO asked her to elaborate, the stylist paused. A long pause. A telling pause. What she said next would change the entire trajectory of the scandal and expose a truth the fashion house had never considered. Because according to the stylist, the gown didn't disappear at the end of the shoot. It disappeared much earlier. And the person who handled the gown last wasn't a member of the wardrobe team. It was someone else entirely. And when she revealed who, it would bring the investigation face to face with the moment everything truly went wrong, the moment every assumption collapsed. But what came next would be bigger, deeper, and far more explosive than anyone at Galvin London ever imagined. Who handled the gown last? Who touched it after the stylist? Who lifted it from the rack when no one else was looking? That was the question sitting like a live wire in the room. Humming, dangerous, ready to snap. Because moments earlier, the stylist had dropped a statement loaded with meaning. A statement that didn't just confirm suspicion, but hinted at something bigger, stranger, far more revealing than anyone expected. "I always wondered if that dress would resurface." You don't say something like that lightly. You don't pause before saying it unless there's a memory attached. Unless there's something you've been carrying for years. And now, with the dress staring back at them from a Netflix promo, that memory was resurfacing just as vividly as the gown itself. So the CEO leaned forward, not aggressively, but intently. "What do you mean?" she asked. Another pause. A breath. A long exhale that carried years' worth of unspoken tension. The stylist finally spoke. "It wasn't a member of my team who took the gown. We didn't pack it up. We didn't move it. We didn't ship it. Someone else collected it. Someone who wasn't supposed to." Silence. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the brand accelerate. Because this wasn't what they expected to hear. Not even close. They had assumed the gown must have disappeared after the photo shoot, during cleanup, in the chaos of wrapping. But this changed everything. The CEO asked again, voice steady, careful. "Who?" And the stylist gave a name that sent a ripple through the call, a name that rewrote the entire understanding of the timeline, a name that would have raised eyebrows years earlier, if only anyone had known it at the time. It wasn't a stylist. It wasn't an assistant. It wasn't a courier. It wasn't a magazine employee. It was someone tied directly to the talent. Someone from the talent's personal team in this fictional docudrama, who had no authorization to handle borrowed wardrobe items at all. Someone who should never have touched the gown. Someone who walked into the room, said something casual like, "I'll take care of this," and left with it before anyone thought to question them. The stylist remembered the moment perfectly, because it felt off even then. "I remember turning around and seeing them folding the dress," she said, her voice low, almost ashamed that she hadn't acted sooner. "They said they were making sure everything was organized before the next setup. I assumed they were helping. I didn't think to question it. Why would she?" Stylists are trained to trust the talent's personal team, to avoid confrontation, to keep harmony on set, to prioritize the shoot above all else. And that's how mistakes happen, small, seemingly harmless moments that turn into years-long mysteries. But in this fictional narrative, the stylist's memory didn't stop there. She saw something else, a detail that haunted her. Before they left with the dress, I remember they slipped something into the garment bag. It looked like a folder or a notebook. I assumed it was paperwork, but I never saw that bag again. Suddenly, the missing signature on the return sheet made sense. Suddenly, the missing paperwork made sense. Suddenly, the timeline gap wasn't a gap anymore. It was a deliberate detour. Because if someone from the talents team took the gown early, then the stylist didn't lose it. The assistants didn't misplace it. The magazine didn't mishandle it. The fashion house didn't overlook it. The gown left intentionally. And the stylist, carrying this silent suspicion for years, finally admitted something that made the CEO's stomach clench. "I didn't want to cause a scandal," she whispered. "I didn't want to point fingers. I didn't want the magazine to blame me, or the brand, or anyone. But I knew, even then, that something was wrong." This was more than regret. This was fear. Fear of backlash. Fear of being blacklisted. Fear of disrupting a major photo shoot. Because the fashion world, even in a fictional narrative, is political, delicate, full of protocols and alliances. And pointing out that someone from the talent's personal circle had taken a designer gown off premises without authorization, that was the kind of accusation that could end careers. But now that the gown had reappeared publicly, now that the brand was facing questions, now that Netflix had unknowingly showcased the missing piece, the stylist finally felt compelled to speak. And her story triggered an emotional jolt that reframed everything. Because now we're not talking about a vanished dress. We're talking about an unauthorized removal, a boundary crossed, a rule broken, a breach of professional conduct. And that realization triggered something inside CEO Katherine Holmgren. A shift, a recalibration, a steely focus. Because the more she listened, the more she understood the gravity of the moment. The gown wasn't merely missing. It wasn't forgotten. It wasn't accidentally blended into someone's personal wardrobe. It was taken, removed, carried out of the venue with intention, by someone who should never have touched it. And suddenly, the Netflix promo wasn't just a curiosity. It was evidence, proof of where the gown ended up. The CEO asked the stylist one final question. Why didn't you say anything before? And the stylist answered with heartbreaking honesty. I was afraid. I thought if the dress never resurfaced, it would quietly fade away. But now that I've seen it again, I can't pretend anymore. This was the emotional fracture point, the moment where guilt, memory, and revelation collided into a wave that swept the entire team into a new phase of the investigation. Because now they needed answers. Real answers. Not guesses. Not theories. Not faded recollections. If someone from the talents team had taken the gown, why? Why interfere with wardrobe? Why remove a borrowed designer piece? Why do it when stylists were still present? Why hide it? And why, years later, bring it back into the public eye? Was it intentional? Was it careless? Was it strategic? Was it impulsive? Every possibility opened a new corridor of speculation. And that's when the CEO made a decision. It was time to confront the hardest question of all. What did the talent herself know? Did she know the gown was borrowed? Did she know it hadn't been returned? Did she know her team member had taken it? Did she know it still belonged to the brand? Every scenario carried emotional weight. Every possibility carried implications. Every answer would lead the brand down a different path. The boardroom felt colder. The staff more alert. The stakes suddenly real. Because if the stylist's memory was accurate, if the timeline indicated the gown left the shoot in someone else's hands, then the brand wasn't just facing a logistics error. They were facing a breach of trust at the highest level. But here's the twist. The stylist wasn't done. She had one more memory, one more detail she had buried, one more piece of the puzzle. And when she shared it, the entire room froze. She said, I remember what the team members said when they took the dress. The CEO's voice tightened. What did they say? The stylist swallowed. They said, she'll want this. That line was the match, the spark, the detonator. Because suddenly, every assumption the brand made, every theory of misplacement or error, evaporated. The gown wasn't taken by accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't oversight. It was purposeful, intentional, deliberate. She'll want this. Who's she? The stylist didn't say the name. She didn't have to. Everyone in the virtual meeting knew. Everyone in the room felt the same chilling realization. And if the dress had been taken for her, then the entire scandal was no longer about the dress itself. It was about intention, possession, control, choice. And the team realized something that made their blood run cold. If that statement was true, then what came next would expose a truth far bigger than a missing gown. A truth no one at Galvin London was prepared to face. She'll want this. That was the line that wouldn't leave anyone's mind. For simple words, casual, almost friendly on the surface, but loaded with implications beneath. For words that turned a simple wardrobe mystery into something deeper, darker, and far more intentional. Because once the stylist repeated that phrase, the entire narrative inside Galvin London shifted. Before that moment, the missing gown had been treated like an administrative mishap, a logistical oversight, an unfortunate but not unprecedented error in the fast-moving world of fashion shoots. But after that line, everything changed. Because she'll want this wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't miscommunication. It was purpose. And purpose changes the stakes of everything. The CEO felt it immediately. Her staff felt it. Even the stylist, reliving the moment years later. Could now see the meaning she had missed at the time. This wasn't just a team member casually helping with wardrobe. This wasn't someone putting something away absent-mindedly. This wasn't someone cleaning up. This was someone taking possession. And possession, especially of a high-end designer gown that wasn't theirs, completely altered the frame of the investigation. The CEO asked the stylist again, slower this time, as though the weight of each syllable might reveal something new. "You're certain those were the exact words?" The stylist didn't hesitate. "Yes. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now? Yes. I'm certain." A hush fell over the call. Not silence. Silence is still, peaceful, empty. This wasn't that. This was the quiet before a storm. Because now they had something approximating motive. And even in a fictional docudrama, motive is the thread that unravels everything. Why would she want the gown? Why would someone from her team take it? Why would they hide it? Why would they never return it? Why bring it into a Netflix promo years later? Every question felt heavier than the last. And with each question, the emotional weight inside Galvin grew. Confusion, irritation, anger, betrayal, embarrassment, a swirl of emotions, each one tightening the atmosphere. Eventually, the CEO broke the silence. "We need to review everything from that day." That meant digging back into the archives. Emails, logs, text messages, calendar appointments, courier records, photo timestamps, anything that could reconstruct the day with forensic precision. And what they found wasn't clean. It wasn't neat. It wasn't orderly. It was chaos. The original shoot had been hectic, more hectic than anyone remembered. Multiple outfit changes, a tight schedule, last-minute creative adjustments, additional shots added on impulse, assistants running in and out, a high-profile talents team moving around the set with surprising autonomy. The stylist admitted she had felt overwhelmed that day. She remembered pressure. She remembered rushing. She remembered trying to keep up with demands that changed minute to minute. And in that chaos, one small detail had slipped through the cracks: the emerald gown, quietly disappearing from the rack while attention was elsewhere. But now that detail wasn't small anymore. It was monumental, because now the gown wasn't just missing. Now, the gown was taken. Now, the gown was claimed. "She'll want this." Those words hovered like a ghost over the entire conversation. The brand's inventory specialist stepped forward next, speaking hesitantly. "We checked the garment bag after the shoot, and the dress wasn't there. But there was something else inside." That startled everyone. "What?" the CEO asked. "A notepad. A small leather-bound notebook with no identifying information. We assumed someone left it behind, but when we tried to trace it, no one claimed it. It had no names, no labels, nothing. It wasn't ordinary. It wasn't typical. It was suspicious. A notebook left behind in a garment bag where the gown should have been?" The stylist, listening from her end, inhaled sharply. "That must have been what I saw them slip in." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Not only had the gown been removed, but something had been inserted in its place. Why? What purpose did it serve? A distraction? A placeholder? A mistake? The contradictions grew. If the person who took the gown replaced it with a notebook, that suggested intention. But if the notebook was left behind and never retrieved, that suggested sloppiness. So which was it? Intention or carelessness? The CEO's mind raced through the implications. If it was intentional, then the disappearance of the gown wasn't random. If it was careless, then the person removing it wasn't as stealthy as the act suggested. Either scenario was troubling. Next, the brand's archivist chimed in with yet another revelation. There was a note from the magazine about a missing garment, but the way they phrased it, it sounded like they believed we had retrieved it ourselves. That didn't make sense. Not unless someone had given the magazine that impression. Someone from the shoot. Someone with authority. Someone who could speak on behalf of the wardrobe team, or pretend to. Everything was pointing in one impossible direction. The missing dress wasn't lost. It was redirected. And that realization was the moment the emotional tone inside the boardroom hardened. Confusion turned into clarity. Irritation turned into frustration. Frustration turned into something colder: resolve. Because this wasn't a fashion mystery anymore. This was a breach. And in the fashion world, even fictionally, breaches have consequences. Because luxury isn't just about silk, sequins, and silhouettes. It's about relationships, trust, respect. Protocol. Borrowing and returning isn't optional. It's the foundation of the entire system. So when a gown leaves a shoot without authorization, when paperwork is missing, when details contradict, when memories clash, when evidence resurfaces years later in the form of a Netflix promo, it creates a crisis, not of fabric, but of reputation. And in this fictional docudrama, Katherine Holmgren understood that better than anyone. So she asked the question her entire team had been avoiding. Do we contact her team directly? The room bristled. Contacting a high-profile talent about a missing gown, especially one that had reappeared in a major promo, wasn't a casual decision. It was a move filled with political risk. A move that could be perceived as accusatory. A move that could escalate quickly. Some staff members immediately objected. It could backfire. We need more evidence. What if it's misinterpreted? What if the Netflix promo stylist provided a similar gown? But the CEO countered calmly, assertively. We're not making accusations. We're asking for clarification. And we have every right to do so. Still, you could feel the tension. Because while the brand had regained the missing piece of the puzzle, they hadn't yet answered the biggest question. Why was the gown used again? Why now? Why this promo? Who made that decision? And did the person who took the gown originally ever intend for it to come back into public view? Those answers remained locked behind closed doors, doors only one group could open. The talent's personal team. The CEO knew contacting them would trigger a chain reaction, a PR scramble, a legal shield, a carefully crafted narrative, a sudden flurry of calls and emails, maybe even denial, maybe defensiveness, maybe silence, maybe cooperation. Anything was possible. But before any message could be drafted, before the team could even formulate a plan, the inventory specialist spoke again. Hesitant, almost afraid of what they were about to reveal. There's something else, they said. The CEO looked at them sharply. What is it? The specialist swallowed. About 6 months ago, we received an anonymous inquiry asking about the emerald gown. The room froze. What kind of inquiry? The CEO asked, her voice suddenly sharper. A question. Just one. They asked whether the gown was still listed as missing. Time stopped. Every pair of eyes in the room widened. Every breath caught. Every pulse quickened. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was an accident. Someone had checked. Someone had wanted to know. Someone had been watching. The CEO leaned back slowly, her mind racing. Who sent the inquiry? We don't know, the specialist whispered. The email was made from a temporary address. It disappeared afterward. Another silence, heavier than the last, charged with meaning. Why would someone ask about the gown 6 months ago? 6 months before the Netflix promo. 6 months before the dress reappeared. 6 months before the world recognized it again. The timing wasn't just suspicious. It was deliberate. And as the realization settled, the CEO spoke the words that no one wanted to say aloud, but everyone was already thinking. Whoever asked knew exactly what they were looking for. And if someone knew the gown was missing 6 months ago, then the Netflix promo wasn't a coincidence. It was the next move. And the brand had just stumbled into the middle of a game they didn't even realize they were playing. But the biggest twist, the one that would send this fictional scandal spiraling into a new level of intensity, didn't come from the brand, the stylist, or the photographer. It came from the anonymous inquirer. Because the brand finally traced where the inquiry originated. Not who, but where. And when they discovered the location, what came next would turn everything upside down. And no one on that call was prepared for it. What does it mean when an anonymous inquiry, sent from a temporary email address, crafted with surgical precision, scrubbed of identity, suddenly links back to a location that no one expected? What does it mean when the where becomes more important than the who? Because the where changes everything. Because as the brand's tech analyst pulled up the metadata, tracing the digital breadcrumbs hidden beneath the disposable inbox, the room held its breath. And when the location finally appeared on the screen, everything shifted. Because the anonymous inquiry didn't come from a random city. It didn't come from a fashion blogger's home. It didn't come from a PR agency. It didn't come from the magazine's headquarters. It didn't come from a stylist's office. It came from a hotel. A luxury hotel. A hotel famously used, in this fictional universe, by celebrity teams for meetings. A hotel where privacy is guaranteed. A hotel known within industry circles as a place where sensitive business is conducted away from paparazzi eyes. The room went still. Because this wasn't just suspicious. It was strategic. Whoever checked on the gown 6 months ago wasn't confused. They weren't researching. They weren't curious. They were preparing. Preparing for what? A comeback? A campaign? A promo? A project? A narrative shift? The possibilities exploded like fireworks inside the CEO's mind. The tech analyst continued, voice low. The inquiry was sent from inside the business lounge. The user connected to the hotel network at 3:42 p.m., stayed online for less than 15 minutes, sent the message, then disconnected. That kind of behavior wasn't casual. It wasn't accidental. It was the digital equivalent of slipping into a room, dropping a note, and disappearing before anyone realized you were there. It felt calculated. The CEO narrowed her eyes. Do we know anything else about the device used? The analyst shook their head. It was masked. No identifiable markers. Of course it was masked. People who go to such lengths don't leave sloppy footprints. But the location alone told a story. Because that hotel wasn't used by ordinary staff. It wasn't used by casual employees. It was used by high-level personnel, agents, managers, PR strategists, the kind of people who structure image, reputation, and long-term branding. Which meant only one thing. Whoever sent the inquiry was connected to the talent at a level deeper than anyone expected. Someone with access. Someone with knowledge. Someone who treated the missing gown like a loose thread, one that needed to be checked before it unraveled. The emotional weight of that realization pulsed across the room. Because if someone linked to the talent had checked on the gown 6 months ago, that meant the Netflix promo wasn't the first time they'd thought about the dress. It had been on their radar. And that raised the next, even more unsettling question. Why would someone care if the gown was still marked as missing? Why would it matter? Why check the status at all? Why reach out anonymously? Unless they were planning something that required the gown to be accounted for. Or unaccounted for. The CEO voiced the question everyone was thinking. Was the Netflix promo planned around that gown? Improbable. Illogical. Ridiculous. And yet, the timing lined up. The inquiry came months before filming. Months before wardrobe selection. Months before the promo shoot. This fictional narrative twisted deeper and deeper. The stylist on the call let out a shaky breath. That dress wasn't just chosen then. It was sought. Her voice trembled with the enormity of the implication. Because if the gown's reappearance was intentional, if it was planned, orchestrated, selected for a specific purpose, then the entire situation took on a new form. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't carelessness. This was symbolism. The gown had a history, a story, an emotional charge, a past wrapped in unanswered questions. And to bring it back, to wear it publicly, after all these years? That meant something. But what? Why resurrect a controversy buried in silence? Why risk the attention? Why risk the brand's memory of the missing piece? Why risk everything for one?